but like for those who don't know, like where the protests about the economy started before the this explosion and all of that, like maybe what's up in Lebanon.
Sure. So just to give you some context, and now I know how to work this properly, I'm going to open my car window and I will show you. So that's where I live.
Mm-hmm.
The entire building's facade was destroyed from the port blast that happened. If you can see just down the street behind those trees is a section of the new port. So I live in a neighborhood called Maram Khayel, which was impacted tremendously by the port blast. And the reason I'm starting it this way, oh, I mean, the port is really right here. And actually that's the view from my window when I'm upstairs. So the reason I'm starting off in a somewhat somber note is because next week will be the 1-year anniversary of the port blast. And things have been rapidly deteriorating, not just since the port blast last year, but as you said, Khalid, earlier, the last 2 years have seen a very, very devastating toll to this country for a number of things that have happened, one of which is economics, which you hinted at earlier. I think when you visited, which by the way, you said 11 years, time goes by very quickly.
That was crazy. I mean, yeah, it was 2010. It feels like yesterday.
So the money that you used 11 years ago was worth roughly the same amount up until almost 2 years ago. It was at 1,500 lira to the dollar, which was more or less a fixed rate, a managed float that was in place. Just a few days ago, it was at 25,000 lira to the dollar. So it lost over 90% of its value. So if you can imagine having money in your wallet that disappears in almost all of its value very quickly, that's become a reality here. The political situation is terrible. There has been no government. There's only been a caretaker government for a year. There's been no functioning government for a year, if not longer. That's been paralysis. And add to that, I mean, every country has had a tough time, 2020, 2021, with coronavirus. It took its toll here. There's a resurgent wave of this Delta deadly version. So the numbers have gone up significantly in the last few days. There's talk of a potential shutdown once again, lockdown. But that's the minor side. The major is that the country is ungovernable. And the port blast is not a normal, it's not a, the term blast, I think, does not define it correctly. And I apologize if I'm fading with the sunset. I will turn on a light when needed. Just
yeah, it looks like you're all right.
I'm all right? Okay.
Yeah,
if I ever need
we
to
can
turn
see
that
you
on,
just
you let
fine.
me know. Okay, good. The port blast is not a blast. It's the largest non-nuclear explosion in modern history.
No,
So
it was insane. I saw
yeah,
the video.
It's insane. Yeah.
I haven't seen
And
anything.
I mean, ammonium nitrate, when in small amounts used for fertilizer, is one thing. There was 2,700 tons of it parked in the port for nearly 7 years. Most of it, not all of it, some of it was siphoned off. Most of it is now, part of Beirut. I mean, we all got impacted by it. And it's been a very, very, very bad time.
Yeah, but to sort of explain that a little bit deeper, like there were these tons of ammonium nitrate that was stored at the port. From what I've read, it was kind of improperly stored, and it was stored next to something that it was fireworks or something, that flammable materials next door, and the fire started next door, and that exploded the ammonium nitrate. That's what I read.
There was hazardous material in the same warehouse, which included fireworks and included small scale weaponry, things that things that could catch on fire if heated to a certain degree, which is what happened. And yes, that those smaller explosions led to a blast prior to the main blast. So there was a lot of hazardous material in that warehouse. But the ammonium nitrate was the reason why this whole thing happened.
Do you have a concept of or do you have a theory? Because I feel like there have been different stories told about that stock of ammonium nitrate. Um, one story that I read was that it was sort of accidentally or misshipped or something like that. Do you have a concept of some group or part of the Lebanese government or or some group in Lebanon that was deliberately housing that?
No, the facts have been delivered. There's a cargo ship with Syrian businessmen, ties with the Syrian regime, and it was parked at Beirut's port, almost certainly at this point for warlike reasons, not fertilizer. Um, so that those investigations have been done. More recently, there's I think it's a French newspaper, Figaro, if I'm not mistaken, that had an in-depth discussion on the port blast. Uh, the conduits in Lebanon, one assumes that it's allies of the Syrian regime. It would be a very unusual situation if it was opponents of the. That's one obvious conclusion, and that's why that could point to the reason why we have not had an investigation. This type of enormous explosion requires something that is done in an international to international standards, not a sloppy domestic patching up investigation, which is what would happen.